Hello everyone, my name is Nathan and today it's time for another episode of Let's Make a Game. In today's episode I would like to do something experimental, just as a little proof of concept and to figure stuff out. We might use this eventually, but for the time being it's not really progressing the game, but it's still interesting. What I would like to accomplish is a little notepad on the side right here, so that I can pop it up, maybe using the tab key for instance, and then I can left click in order to add an item, I can right click an item in order to remove it, and last but not least I can middle click in order to sort the list alphabetically, ascending or descending. So of course this concept can be used in order to create any type of list, so already thinking through this code will help us in the future to create lists for actual in-game concepts. So in order to get this started, I made myself a little notepad graphic, which I just loaded up from the internet. Let's see, it is 256 by 352. It doesn't really matter for the time being. I also added it to a object. So this object right here has the sprite assigned. I also created a new script called scr_notepad. It is currently empty, but it is located on our object core, namely on the draw event right here. So with that out of the way, we can go directly to the coding part. Let's start with the global variables. I want to add something right here. So I'm gonna call this something along the lines of notepad, and let's make a variable called notepad equals true to begin with. And also I want another variable called text input equals nothing for the time being. So with this variable, we will always track whatever the user, the player, is currently inputting into a text field, whatever the heck that may be. So this is kind of a temporary variable. So with that out of the way, let's hop into the notepad right away. Now, first things first, so that we don't forget it, we want to draw self. If you have something on the draw event, type draw self in the very beginning, otherwise it's not gonna draw anything. Good. With that out of the way, let's implement the toggle functionality first. So for that I want to say if keyboard check released, and we want to check for the key tab for the time being. That could be a thing. And then I want to change our notepad variable from true to false or vice versa. So I think we can add that right here. Object core.notepad equals not object core.notepad. Something along these lines, and close it off. There we go. We could spare ourselves a couple of lines because it is such a short command. Good. So with that, we already have the toggle functionality. Let's actually do the create notepad functionality. Here I want to say if object core.notepad equals true, and also if no instance already exists of the object notepad. Then we want something to happen, namely we want to add the background, which is our sprite image that we loaded into an object, and I'm gonna say instance create room width and room height, and also object notepad. So we are spawning it at the very right bottom corner of our room, and the reason for that is because I have set the origin, the point of origin, to the corner at the bottom, as you can see, approximately. It is not exactly the corner, but you know, it is just something. It is right along these lines here. Good, so now that we got this in place, we also want to set a bunch of variables. For instance, we want from the object notepad the image speed to be equal to 0, and we also want the object notepad image index to be equal to 0. Now the reason for that is, let's actually check this out. I have two sprites right here. One is with the notepad and the other is with the notepad and a little text field background. So right here is where the player is gonna type his stuff or their stuff. And therefore we need to set the image speed and also index to 0. However, as soon as we click on the notepad, we want to switch to the index 1 because we want to indicate that the player can type something. So at this point, I would love to create myself the list, and we're gonna call this notepad list equals ds_list create, something along these lines. And also we want to open up a new file. The file I'm gonna call notepad.ini, something like that. Yeah, that seems to be fine. And of course, just like in the previous episodes, we want to ds_list read from the notepad list and ini read string from the notepad section, something like that, and also notes. So these things I've just created right here. If this file doesn't exist, it is going to be created. Simple as that. But of course, since I already tested this code a little bit, I should have this notepad ini in my folder structure already in my app data. But if it wasn't, it would create this new section and it would create this new key with the default values being empty in case there is nothing. Good, now that we have populated the list in case the list was already full, you know, we can again close the ini file. And of course, if the ini file was empty, then also the list is going to be empty. Now we can add a couple of script variables. First of all, I want the list size variable. I want to know how large is the freaking list. So we're gonna say ds_list size, and of course from the notepad list. Then we want the text height to be equal to 30 and the user input to be equal to false and the sorting order to be equal to true. So basically here we get how many items do we have currently in our list after loading it from the ini file. It could also be 0, of course. The text height is simply the text height in pixels, and then we have the user input, which currently is false. That basically means should the system listen to the key input of the user or not? Currently not, of course, but if we click on the notepad, this should flip. And the sorting order would be true at the moment, which is ascending, and then false would be descending. Good, so now that we got this out of the way, let's get out of this if statement, and we want to also be able to destroy the notepad in case we hit the tab key again. So if object core.notepad, if this true or false value is actually false, and also the instance exists of object notepad. Right, of course we want to check if there is an instance, because if there isn't, then we cannot really destroy the notepad because there is none. But before we destroy it, we of course want to save the current list that is on there. So if ds_list size, so if the notepad list is bigger than 0, basically meaning that there is at least one item in the list, then we want to save it. Therefore, I'm gonna say ini open, and we want to open up the notepad ini. Make sure this is spelled the exact same way as above. After that, we want to ini write string, and we want to populate the notepad section and the notes key, and we want the value of the ds_list write notepad list, something along these lines. And of course, ini close should be followed after that. Good. If that is not the case, we can say else, because that basically means we have no items in the list, right? So else ds_list add notepad list no items. And this basically means we are gonna replace the first item of the list with a no items list. So whenever there's nothing on the list, no items should be displayed as a text. Okay, now of course we want to do the same thing as above. So yeah, maybe this is not the best way because we now have to copy this over, and I really don't like to do that. Yeah, we should just actually delete one of those guys and take this one here and bring it outside of the if-else statement. So there we go, something along these lines. And now we don't have to have it twice in the code. Good. However, after closing the ini, we of course want to destroy the instance. So ds_list destroy, we want to clean that up as well. There we go. And also with the object notepad, something along these lines, we want to instance destroy. Great, okay, that seems to be fine. Let's go ahead and do the draw text. Of course, now comes the interesting part. For the time being, we just loaded a list, an empty list basically, and now we want to populate this freaking background texture we have with text. For that, we say if instance exists object notepad. So we basically check, is the notepad visible at the moment or not? And first of all, we want to define the user input. So if text input, now we're going to use that variable. If it is not empty, of course, we want to first of all check, is there anything in the text? But if it is populated with anything, then we want to draw set color. We want to set it to white. There we go. And also we want to draw a text and transformed, by the way. So for the x value, we're going to say object notepad.x minus object notepad.sprite width and plus 30. That is just what I estimated will be the perfect spot for our first object. We also want a y value, right? So object notepad.y minus object notepad.sprite height plus 30, there we go. Then we need the string, which is the text input. And we also need the scale, the text scale. Yeah, let's just go with 2 for the time being, and the angle is going to be 0, something along these lines. So just to be abundantly clear, if you remember, we have our point of origin for the notepad at the bottom right corner. So I have to check for the x coordinate and take this minus the sprite width plus 30, which will bring me to the left corner 30 pixels away from it. So that's the reasoning behind this code. Let's continue. After the user input, we want to do the list, right? So for I equals 0, I should be smaller than our list size variable. Then we want I to be plus plus. So now for every item that we have saved in our list, we want to draw it beneath one another. For that, we're gonna also set the color just so that we have done this for the future. And we're gonna say C black. Oh, actually it is a useful thing because we don't want to stick with white, right? So now draw text transformed, same thing as before, but this time we want, yeah, that's right. We want the x coordinate still to be object notepad.x minus object notepad.sprite width plus 30. That's still gonna remain the same. However, now the y coordinate should be different depending on where we are with the I variable. So for that, I'm gonna say object notepad.y minus object notepad.sprite height plus 60, and now we add the I value. So 60 is just a guesstimation that I made previously. I had to fiddle around with this until I got the perfect spot. It might be different for you as well. This is just my suggestion for this particular sprite. So after that, we want to say plus I times text height. So with that, we defined how far apart we want the lines to be with the text height. And with that out of the way, we want to go for the string. The string, of course, is going to be ds_list find value, and the value is going to be notepad list I. Write the ID of the notepad list and then the position of the item. So it goes from 0 to however many items we have. Okay, and then we also want the scale to be 2, and the angle to be 0. Something like that. Great, okay, that was quite a line there. Now let's continue to the mouse interaction. Of course, there are 3 types of interactions that I have planned for this script. First one is a left click, which will add new items, then a right click to remove them, and middle mouse button to sort the items. So I could say if mouse X is bigger than the object notepad.x minus object notepad.sprite width, and mouse X is smaller than object notepad.x, And also the mouse Y should be bigger than the object notepad.y minus object notepad.sprite height, and mouse Y should be smaller than object notepad Y. There we go. So now I defined the area where we are gonna trigger all the clicks whenever I'm above the freaking notepad. And also when the notepad exists, by the way. So first things first, let's add to the list. For that we say if mouse check button released, the mouse button left. Now let's activate the user input by setting the user input to be equal to true. So we want to activate that true or false value, and also we want to set the text input to be equal to nothing to begin with. You know, once we add a new item to the list, and also we want the object notepad image index to be equal to 1. If you remember, this has the actual background graphic for the text input field. Other than that, we also have to have an option to delete the last item, which we're gonna do with a mouse check button released. We're gonna say mouse button right. This time we only want to delete something from the list, and it seems as though I forgot something. Yeah, I have something too much here. Anyways, here we want to say ds_list delete. We want to delete the last item of the notepad list, which basically is the list size, but of course -1, because the ds_list starts at 0. But the 0th thing on the list is the first or the one object, you know? So we have to say -1. After that, we set the list size to be equal to ds_list size notepad list, just to update it. Great, now we have to go ahead and actually sort the list. So we're gonna say if mouse check button released, mouse button middle, there we go. Then we want the sorting order to be equal to not sorting order if we click the middle mouse button. So switch from ascending order to descending order. Next up, we also want to set the list sort function. This is a new function that you can actually use. Well, it's not new, but I haven't used it yet. And also the ascending variable, which is true or false, is going to be the sorting order, whatever the heck it is at the moment. Great, okay, we got so much stuff out of the way. There's just a little something still to go. And that little something is the actual user input. So let's call it user text input. I'm gonna say if user input equals true, then we want something to happen. Namely, we want to find a value in the DS list. And that value is from the notepad list, and it is the first object. And if that item, that first item, is equal to no items, then we know nothing is in our list. So what we want to do is ds_list delete notepad list, and we want to delete this object because the user is now inputting something, therefore there are not no items anymore. Also, we want to set the list size to ds_list size notepad list, just to update the values once again. Next up, we're gonna define a variable called last key. I'm just gonna use lk for that. And we get this variable quite easily using keyboard_last key, something like that. Of course, you have to type it correctly. Next up, also the variable last character. So that would be keyboard_last character. Good. Now, if the keyboard check pressed VK any key, so now we check if any of the keys on the keyboard are being pressed, then we want something to happen. For instance, we want to delete the last character, depending on whether or not we click on the backspace. We also want to be able to add items to the list. And these are basically the two main steps. Let's do the delete last character first. Here we can say if the last character equals VK backspace, what is up with that? Backspace, there we go. If we hit the backspace button, then text input equals string copy. So we want to copy whatever we already have in the text input, and it's going to be copied from the string text input. The index is going to be 1, and the count is going to be the string length from our current text input, but -1. So we basically make the string length a little bit smaller and therefore deleting the last character. Good, 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 good. I think with that we have it already out of the way. So we could even grab this and actually place it right here. I would say this is appropriate, and here we can add an else if statement. And that if statement is if the last character equals vk enters. So if we press the enter key, and also if the text input is not equal to empty, then we want to add an item to the list, which is a ds list add to the notepad list, and we want to add the current text input. Also, we want to set the list size to ds list size notepad again to update the inputs or the values, and also the text input should be reset to nothing. The user input should be reset to false, and also the object notepad.image index should be equal to 0 again. Of course, making sure that we spell stuff correctly. Good. Then I have one more else if statement ready for this, because there is another situation that we could get into, and that is basically all the other characters. And this is here a code that I just found on the internet. So this little bit that we are adding here, I have no idea why this works. So let me actually copy this part out. There's no sense in me writing it because I don't really understand. What I understand is that all the characters do have an ID or a number to them. So we can judge if we press a K, is it bigger than 65 or 90 or whatever the heck. So this is the code that I added right here, this if statement. And now we can basically say text input equals text input plus last character, something along these lines. So it's going to add to the text input everything that we basically type on the keyboard. Great. Okay, now I made a little mistake right here, but with that out of the way, I think we have made it, guys. Woo! There we go. Look at that. We have our notepad. I can disable it using the tab key or enable it. And we have no items because there are no items. Let's left click on the thingamajiggy. You can see it changed to the second sprite and we are ready to type something out. So let's for instance say TEXT. Very original. You can see we can also hit the backspace in order to delete a character, add that again, and we hit the enter button and it is now the first item. Let's do another item. This is gonna be item 2. We hit the enter button and there we go, it is added. Let's do a third one. Let's say this is third. No, actually, let's not do a T. Let's do a third one. Okay, something along these lines. Oh, by the way, spaces do not work momentarily for this script, but whatever. Now, I'm gonna hit the middle mouse button in order to sort the stuff alphabetically. You can see A, I, T, or I can hit it again in order to do it vice versa. Now, the last one is first. Great, last but not least, I should be able to right-click in order to remove an item, and there we go, right-clicked, everything seems to function properly. Also, I can get rid of this thing entirely and also enable it again, and you see the items are still there. Moreover, I can even start a new game, and the notepad list should still be there. Look at that, text and item 2, beautiful. Woo! With that out of the way, let's wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great time and see you soon. Bye bye.